Hey, listener, welcome back to Rewildology, where we explore conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell-Norman, conservation biologist and world traveler. If you've listened to the show before, then you are well aware that we're not scared to talk about taboo or uncomfortable topics. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. I love that you're here, and you'll soon hear why this show is different than most nature podcasts. Today, I'm chatting with Anneliese Schenk, who studies a rather dark but important topic, genocide. We humans are a violent species, although one could argue not near as violent as we used to be. And if you question that at all, just go listen to an episode of Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. Humans have done some pretty effed up things in the past, and as a woman, I am so glad we've evolved from Genghis Khan times. Anyways, in today's show, Anna and I chat in depth about the 1994 Rwanda genocide. She discovered her passion for the topic when she joined a study abroad trip in undergrad to learn more about the event. She was hooked. It combined her curiosity in human psychology, her love of history, and how to help communities avoid similar atrocities in the future. Don't worry, there's a strong conservation undertone throughout the episode. We talk about how human violence affects local wildlife, especially during genocides, and how Rwanda has become a leader in conservation, famous for its local superstar, mountain gorillas. Anna refers to a lot of resources throughout the chat, which I've provided in the show notes at rewildology.com. The more we know about this concept, the more we're equipped to avoid it in the future. As always, if you're digging the show, be sure to subscribe so that you can be notified when a new episode drops. I'd also love to hear what you think by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or commenting on the episode on Rewildology's YouTube channel. Of course, you can DM on Instagram at Rewildology or email at hello@rewildology.com. And now on to my chat with Anna. Well, sweet. I'm so excited to have you here today, Anna. We are going to have a freaking blast. I know we will. That's because every single time we've talked, it's been so much fun. So to begin, let's just go way on back, because I think the best way to put this all together is to start from the very beginning. So take me back to your childhood. What was it like? Where did you grow up? All those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up pretty close to where I'm currently living. I'm from Delaware, Ohio, which is right outside of Columbus, like maybe a 30-minute drive. And I grew up on a hobby farm, probably is the best way to classify it. So when I was born, my parents had cows. But when I say cows, I mean like 4 cows, not like a giant herd or anything. They only owned like 2.5 acres. But as we got older, I have a little sister. But they wanted us to start doing 4-H and just kind of getting into agriculture and things like that. So they got goats because they were a lot more comfortable with their second grader being around a bunch of goats than multiple large cows.
That makes sense.
So I grew up pretty much, very logical, rational choice.
Yes.
So probably between being in second grade and then my senior year of high school, we probably had over 250 goats at any various point, not all together, but just like, I think we counted it maybe a couple years ago and we're like, oh my gosh, we had a lot of animals over that large stint of time. So, growing up, I always thought I wanted to be a vet because, I'm surrounded by animals. We always had multiple dogs, had like 3 or 4 barn cats at any given time. We had rabbits at one point, just a wide variety of animals. And then my other connection with wildlife is that my mom works at the Columbus Zoo Aquarium as their landscape architect. So she does a lot of project design and, plans exhibits, and she's been doing that since I've been alive. So, I got free like zoo classes and summer camps. So I was at the zoo, which was only 10 minutes from our house, probably 2 or 3 days a week for most of the summer during my childhood. And, the water park and all that stuff. But I just kind of grew up surrounded by conservation, and it's always seemed very second nature to me. And, as I've gotten older, I realized I'm horrible at math and science, specifically the math portion of that. So I've kind of deviated from, the idea of being a vet, and it's changed multiple times as to what I want to do. In high school, it was I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I went into college at Ohio State, and I decided to do psychology and criminology for my majors because that seemed applicable to being a lawyer. And very quickly decided that was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to maybe be a psychologist. And then I applied to grad school, and that kind of fell through, and I kind of took a step back. And kind of how I got into the nonprofit I'm working with today is going into my junior year of undergrad, I did a study abroad called Genocide and Its Aftermath in Rwanda through Ohio State. The professor that was leading it is absolutely wonderful, and she's highly regarded in the field. Her name is Dr. Holly Nyseth Brem. And it was a very small, intimate study abroad, like 12 people. And we just spent 3 weeks in Rwanda learning about basically the timeline of the genocide. So why, from different sociological theories, we think it occurred, and how it compares to other genocides from different points in time and ones that we think might occur in the future. And, the actual events of the genocide. And then the last week we really focused on, how Rwanda has healed from these events, and how it kind of can be seen as, really not a gold standard, because that's the wrong connotation, but is the ideal outcome in a lot of ways for healing and, being a unified nation again. So that study abroad kind of changed a lot of my outlook on what I wanted to do long term. And I'm now currently working with a nonprofit called Miss Able Humera. And they work in Rwanda with disabled women to just do job training and reproductive health training. And it's a wonderful program. And then, I graduated back in the spring. And I'm in the process of applying to grad schools again this upcoming fall, tentatively, for sociology PhDs. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's kind of childhood and college wrapped into one.
All in like one nutshell. Like the super cool thing is I trained you, right? Back in the day. Oh my gosh, that's so fun. How old do you think you were at that time?
I think I was 16 because it was the first year I worked 16? There.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I worked at the zoo with Brooke. That was my first job. I've had it for I think 6 years. But yeah, I was 16 and worked at the zoo, as well as having gone to summer camp there for years. And you trained me on how to do like parking booths in our guest relations department. And it was, you're the same person, you're bubbly and wonderful.
Oh, that's so fun. Yeah. Really laid the groundwork there at the zoo. For sure. But no, it's just like it's just so fun how life comes full circle like that. Like, who would think that at that time that me just training you on how to do a parking booth, and here, 6-ish years later, life has come back full circle. And now we are talking about some very deep stuff, but very important stuff. And then also this phenomenal nonprofit that you are a part of. Yeah. So cool. I had to like throw that little connection piece in there. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. So let's go back. I'm so excited. Oh, that's not the right word. I'm so grateful that you are an expert or way more knowledgeable in this topic than most of us, because a lot of us, anytime we hear about a genocide or anytime we hear about anything like this, we just, because it's uncomfortable, and so we push it away. Like, we don't know much about it. Everybody knows about the Holocaust, of course, and then I think in a little level, people are at least aware of what happens to the Native Americans. So like, people at least know of the concept. Yeah, I would love if you could really start to get down into it. So what is genocide? How does it happen? And then if you want to use some case studies to like go into, that would be great as well. But teach us what this absolutely.
Is. And I will say, again, I have an undergraduate degree in sociology or criminology specifically, and psychology. So I'm in no way an expert on this either. But I have a little bit more background knowledge than I think most people would have. So genocide is the intentional removal of a population, basically. That population can be basically any definition. It could be a race, it can be, which has a broad definition. Race oftentimes isn't what we think of as, in a sociological sense, as we do in the US, of like Black and white and Asian and all of that. There's a lot of subsects of race throughout the world. So like in Rwanda, for example, in our mind, they're Black people, but they defined their social groups largely and the racial groups by class. So they had the Hutu and the Tutsi, and they actually have a third group called the Twa that we don't talk about a lot, who were considered pygmy people. But the Hutu and the Tutsi were classified by a lot of colonial settlers as people, kind of on arbitrary terms, as people who had different sized noses, or who owned more cows was actually a large identifier of it. So if you had 10 or more cows, you were Tutsi. And if you had less than 10 cows, you were Hutu. And very much across Africa, we see a theme with colonialism of those classes being very arbitrarily placed on people. So prior to colonization, and Rwanda was colonized by Belgium primarily, they really didn't have any idea of race. But when the colonists came in, they gave out ID cards and started making rules in their society based around different races and classes of people. Which, again, that's just to reiterate the point that, what we think of as race in the United States is not a universal definition of race, or what comes to mind for a lot of Americans isn't the same thing that comes to mind to someone in Africa or even in Europe occasionally. But yeah, genocide is frequently just the intentional removal of a social or of a group. So it can be religious. There's something going on right now that many will argue is or is not a genocide, depending on what country you're from and what the UN says, which is in Myanmar, and that is a religious-based mass atrocity or act of mass violence at the moment between a group of Muslims and the Buddhists there.
Wow.
So, genocide can be any group being intentionally exterminated, for lack of a better word. And it doesn't have to be necessarily killing. It can be things like genital mutilation, anything that prevents the reproduction of a group or the growth of a group. So it can also be cultural genocide, which is a lot of the times what people think of when they think of the Native Americans. So yes, we did give them like smallpox blankets and things like that actively killed them, but we also put their culture to the side and tried to reform them into making them become more white or more like us. So that removal from them the removal of their culture historically can also be considered a cultural genocide. So it's a big term that can be used to describe a lot of conflicts. And a lot of people do use the word mass violence as a synonym because genocide it just holds some legal standing with like the UN and things like that, because we do have statutes against genocide that were really big. And it is a very new term. It was coined right after the Holocaust by a sociologist. So it's a newer term. So a lot of older conflicts that weren't necessarily called a genocide first, or then went back in history and changed their definition. Yeah. So that's what genocide is. And I have forgotten your other question.
No, that was good. No, so like the perfect example then, or at least one that I think that since it was so close to you and you studied it hardcore, what happened in Rwanda? So when you went over and studied, what happened?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different narratives surrounding it. But basically 1994, they call it the genocide against the Tutsi. So Tutsi were considered more upper class citizens, and then the Hutu were considered lower class citizens. And the very short narrative is that basically there was a major plane crash that involved the death of the president of Rwanda at the time and many of his close members of his cabinet and things like that. And he was Hutu. So prior to this plane crash, there had been a growing narrative and a very strong divide between Hutu and Tutsis. So you had like roll call in school. A lot of the time, they would say your name and then whether you were Hutu or Tutsi afterwards. And a lot of the time, yeah. So there was a very clear narrative of who belonged to what class, because it wasn't necessarily visually apparent. Like I was saying earlier, it's considered racial, but the race wasn't something that people could look at you and say what you were for the most part. So, there was a growing divide, and there had been a lot of jargon and propaganda being published prior to the plane crash surrounding like the Tutsis are trying to destroy the Hutu and we must protect ourselves. And it was to some extent going both ways. But there had been people calling each other cockroaches, which is another big signal of genocide, is when we dehumanize a group through name calling. That's one of our big red flags that we look for on what might turn into a genocide. So there had been a lot of buildup beforehand. It's not just to say a plane crashed and genocide broke out.
Genocide happened.
Right. There had been a lot of conflicts and a lot of smaller, I don't want to say microaggressions, but similar to that occurring beforehand. And so when his plane crashed, they locked down the capital of Kigali, or of Rwanda, Kigali. And they put up road barricades, and basically they were checking everybody's ID cards, and people couldn't leave the province they were in without going through a checkpoint. And it was basically automatic lockdown. And from that point forward, there were about 100 days of violence in which neighbors were turning their neighbors in because you knew who was Hutu or Tutsi, because it was just so common in the dialogue. There were basically militias, so homegrown militias that were forming of Hutus that were going out to kill Tutsi. And they kind of started small hunting groups, and the military was also involved in this. And so they were actively incentivizing people to go out and exterminate Tutsi was often the verbiage used. So this happened for about 100 days. And it's one of the shorter genocides, actually. One of the reasons it's heavily studied is because it is pretty clear-cut from a beginning to an end point, which we'll get to the end point in a second. But the plane crash is pretty much when most historians are going to say the genocide started. And then 100 days later, obviously there was a mass refugee crisis that occurred during this. So individuals who were able to flee left Rwanda and went to neighboring countries like Burundi. So someone by the name of Paul Kagame, who is actually the current president of Rwanda, was one of those individuals who was Tutsi, who fled to Burundi. He got together his own militia of Tutsis, and they re-entered Rwanda and worked their way back into Kigali, which is at the center of Rwanda, slowly but surely, and liberated basically the country at that point. And that clearly marks the end of it. So it's, like I said, studied pretty heavily just because we have a beginning and an end, and it's a shorter conflict. A lot of other conflicts, like Darfur right now, has been going on for since 2004. So it's a very long conflict. So it's very difficult to study because there's so many global players. This one is very clear cut of two groups conflicting for a short period of time. But yeah, that is what happened with the 1994 genocide. Yeah.
So was there like a leader that was like, go out and kill all the Tutsi? Was there someone who rose up as like, I don't want to say the evil figure, but kind of, if we're painting it that way, was there someone that was like, this is all the Tutsi's fault, we need to go out and exterminate them all? Or was it like a collective understanding? But how did it escalate to the point where extermination was the answer, in other words?
Yeah, absolutely. So the president who passed, I am blanking on names and I apologize. The president who died in the plane crash had similar rhetoric to that prior to his death. The rhetoric used by the army and the Hutus that were going out and forming militias was that Tutsis had shot down his plane. So that was kind of the further escalation point. There was already a lot of issues surrounding the two social groups. He had used the inflammatory verbiage to describe that social group. And then you had the false accusation. We don't actually know who shot down the plane to this day. It's likely that it was someone who was working for him, actually. But again, they honestly do not know to this day who shot it down. But it was very unlikely that it was Tutsi. But that likely false accusation is what caused a lot of the further escalation. But there wasn't any individual, which is actually one of the things that scares people a lot about it, is that it was genuinely neighbors turning on neighbors. So a big part of the genocide was that broadcast radio was being used very heavily to push out this propaganda. So, it's a remote country, a lot of hills. It's not easily traveled by foot. So a lot of people relied on radio transmission to communicate with others, to get their news sources. And so there was pretty much a total overhaul of all radio. And it was pretty much turned entirely into propaganda radio. So, radio broadcasters telling you that your neighbor tried to kill the president and things like that really turned into people turning on their neighbors. So there are stories of people who were like, we had dinner with them on a weekly basis and we were really close. And then they tried to or did kill my family. Like, that is why it was so,
This gives me the heebie-jeebies. Yeah. Like, oh my God.
It's why it was so chilling for a lot of people. And it is horrifying. I don't mean to sound chipper or anything like that.
No,
I do. I have studied it a lot, and I plan to study it a lot more in the future as a topic. So it's one of those things where in my mind, this is just a normal conversation.
Oh, I get it. I'm I'm a biologist. Like, I freaking get it. It's like, oh, we're just talking about this, this, and this. And it's like, wait, what did you just say? It's like, okay, I know. I got to put it back in perspective that this is actually weird to anybody else.
Right.
That doesn't know what I'm talking about. I should probably put this in context and not talk about it like this. No, I completely get it. Like, when you're a scientist and that is the way you work, because you have to. To study a topic like this that needs studied, because one, we are a very violent species, and just, why would we ever want to genocide again, And just some of the stuff you were just saying just reminded me so much of what was happening in the US at the end of, the last presidential campaign. And man, that's scary.
And what I will say is we haven't, as the United States, we hit some of those warning points, but we haven't hit most of that list. And I'm sorry that I'm referring to the list and I cannot tell you what all is on there. My brain is blanking, but
you can just send those to me later and I can just put them in show notes or something.
Yeah. But it absolutely is. It's scary. Humans are very much groupthink as a species. And you see that at play with Rwanda. You see that at play with almost or every single genocide. So, I think the big thing that I've taken away from my social science career thus far is, it's kind of like what your parents tell you, if everybody else is jumping off the cliff, are you just going to go do it because everybody else is? It's a reminder to always take a step back in high stress situations or in emotionally strong situations, even more importantly, I would say, and reevaluate the situation and say, well, would I normally do this? Or am I doing this because everyone else is, or because I'm angry, or because I'm stressed? And I think just that pause is incredibly important and something I've personally taken away when I get worked up over something, or, I see everybody else doing something that I'm not quite sure about. Because, most people will, unfortunately, we've seen in studies, do what everybody else is doing and not know why they're doing it. They'll know something's wrong and they won't stop what they're doing. They'll just continue. So there's little life lessons to be learned with social science, even if you're studying mass violence or something like that, or large scale events. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. I mean, we are just completely from like a scientific standpoint, we are a very interesting species. And so I'm just curious, since
Mhm.
I just love evolutionary biology so much. Could you by chance, is there something that's in our DNA that just makes this more of a thing in our species? I mean, I know a lot of species, they do a lot of killing, within, interspecies stuff. But
Mhm.
what is it about humans that we feel it's okay to just kill our own kind?
I don't know from a specifically biological perspective, but I
Hmm.
would say from a social psychology perspective, it's that we are just social creatures overall. So it's a want and a need to fit into a group. Um, so you really want to belong, and if everybody who you want to belong with is doing something like being angry at a different group, you're more inclined to do the same thing. And it goes to the extreme, unfortunately, where they're committing violence against a different group or a group other than you, and you're more inclined to also commit violence against them because you want to fit in. And there's also just the other we don't like things that are not of our clan or of our group. So whatever we identify as our group, we try really hard to protect, and we actively dislike usually what is not familiar or belonging to us in that regard. So
Mm.
yeah,
So
it's
have most genocides then been through, just like with that description that you gave, have most been through just people that look differently, or also have them, or is it like an equal mix of people looking different and just religious groups? Is it just more of a mix, or
yeah. So there's definitely been some research into that, but for the most part, it's an even mix. It's not
mm,
one or the other, and a lot of the time, there's interplay between the two. So you can have ones where a religious, I mean, like even the Holocaust, Jewish people are a religious group, but they also identify as a cultural group, and so those aren't always very clear boundaries. It really is just fear of the other, I would say, that really leads to it overall.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. So how did um that amazing gentleman who's now the Rwandan president, how did
Mhm.
he get it to stop? How do you get a country that's hating and killing each other? How do you get it to stop?
Yeah, so they pretty much erased the concept of Hutu and Tutsi and Chwa. Um, Chwa is still kind of a thing because, like I had mentioned, they're considered pygmy people or dwarf people, which aren't really politically correct terms, but it's what they're referred to in their country. And they actually live in the hills mostly and are pretty much off the grid. So they kind of still exist. They also weren't really involved in the genocide for the most part. But he came back in, and what is also fascinating about Rwanda is he had the option basically to do reprisal killings, which is what a lot of genocide prevention focuses on preventing. Because yes, you've stopped one group from killing the other, but what's to say that that same group isn't incredibly mad about their family dying and
Revenge.
wanting revenge? So he and that's why it's such a wonderful, I don't want to say wonderful story, but it really is an impressive feat that they overcame. But he basically said, there is no more Hutu, there is no more Tutsi, we are all Rwandan, which is something you'll hear over and over again. We are all Rwandan if you visit Rwanda. And they're really proud of that. So they did a lot of work individually and societally to overcome this. They had what's called, and this is really interesting from a human rights perspective, what are called gacaca courts. And these are basically communal court systems they set up. And this took 10 years for them to get through all these cases. But they had community elders, so not people who were trained in law or anything like that, but maybe somebody who had a lot of cows, because they do still use cattle as a form of wealth and a status symbol. So maybe someone who has a lot of cows, and then someone who's a doctor they might have on their committee, and then a third person usually who's also highly regarded in the community. So they have like a panel of 3 people, and they would just reserve a day of the week, and the entire community would come together, usually in like an open field or on a hillside, and they would have someone who was being accused of a crime. And it wasn't necessarily genocide. A lot of this was like, they stole the roofing off my house when I fled the country, or they took my cows, or, it didn't have to, it could be I watched them kill my sibling, but it wasn't necessarily that. It was a lot of small claims too, or property-based claims. And they basically would spend one whole day as a community once a week until they got through all of their claims, going through and hearing all of these cases. And you would self-represent both sides. And it would just be, okay, well, I saw this. And members of the community would chime in and say, yes, I also saw that. Or actually, no, I think it was this person. I saw them do that. And it was almost a community dialogue. It was much different than any court system we've seen in the US or anything like that. And then the board of elders, or highly regarded members of the community, would make a verdict on whether or not that person was guilty and what their punishment was. So they did have a lot of people go to prison, and a lot of research right now in Rwanda is looking at reentry of people who committed genocide back into the communities, and how the community is accepting those individuals, and if they're estranged from their family, or if their family is welcoming them back in, and just how they're getting along, how they're finding income, all of that. So that's a big area of research that's coming out right now. And a lot of the people I'm hoping to work with in grad school are studying that. And then the advisor I mentioned earlier, Dr. Brem, has actually studied those Gacaca courts really heavily in her research, because it's a pretty unique phenomena. And it's actually something that we think could work with other future genocides or ongoing genocides to really help build the community, because it is your community's coming together. And yeah, there's a lot of high tension, but it's good faith that, people are going to listen to your claim or listen to your plea. And then, it's not a legal system that's necessarily deciding your fate. It's people who also belong to that community. So it's a really unifying process is what they're finding. But that's been a big component of overcoming those labels and just healing as a community. And they also have a ton of monuments. There's a National Day of Remembrance on the day it ended. The 100 days from beginning to end are kind of a solemn period in Rwanda. They've done a lot to make sure that their future generation, or that there's a grief period for people who lost individuals. And I will say, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's still plenty of people who fled and have not gone back. And this was in 1994. There's people who are still living in the US or, other countries that were refugees that have no plan of returning and are scared to. It's not a perfect process. And I don't think you could ever hope for it to be completely unifying, but it is one of the better outcomes we've seen with genocide overall. So, yeah.
I mean, that's even with those potentially not so great things, it does sound like from an overall standpoint, it has healed as much as one could hope for in such an awful situation like that, that's fantastic. So what got you, I want to talk about you again.
Yeah.
How did you get so involved in this particular topic? What was it about it that really drew you in and took you all the way halfway across the world to study it on the ground in person? I would love, talk me through that. Where did this idea come up, and how did you get over across the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of asked myself a similar question, and I don't have a surefire answer as to what really led me to it. I already said my mom is a landscape architect, but my other parent is a funeral director. So there's always been kind of something in the back of my head that's been, I think, more comfortable with concepts like death than a lot of people. I think I asked about it a lot earlier, and part of it's growing up on a farm too. We had babies that died. Like they didn't make it necessarily. It's, part of the natural process of life. And I also grew up very Catholic. So death is a pretty core tenet of Christianity as a whole, but specifically Catholicism. So I think a lot of just little things in my life have always made me more comfortable with studying more macabre topics, I think is probably the best way to put it. But then, like I mentioned, in college, and I mean, I didn't have any intent of studying anything like this at any point, really, or with a lot of intent. But I really loved social psychology, I was finding. I worked in a social psychology research lab my sophomore year of college and a little bit of my junior year. And I've always liked political science a lot, and I've loved history. So I've always struggled to find something where I'm like, I like social science, I like psychology, and I like history, but I don't really know how to combine those or if I can combine those. And then I was also studying criminology on the side because I was like, well, if I decide I want to be a lawyer, that probably looks good on a resume or a CV. And I kind of I was told many times by my parents that I should really study abroad, and my grandparents were like, you should really study abroad. Like, it's eye-opening to everybody who does it. We have the funds in your college account to, do it, find something you want to do and do it. It doesn't have to be like super applicable. Just make sure you get credits for it, basically. And I was looking at it, and OSU offered 2 study abroads for my majors. For psychology, it was like going to Germany and visiting like the home of Sigmund Freud, and not a huge Freud fan, and, and Vienna, and, like the birthplace of psychology. And I was like, it's not the worst study abroad trip, but it's Europe. And like, I think I would be content visiting Europe on a vacation and not learning about Freud and Carl Jung. And, I just don't think I'll get that much out of it. And then the other option was for sociology, this study abroad in Rwanda. And they had only done it, I think, one time. I think I was in the second group that went. And it just was very interesting to me. And it was one of those things, I was tired of people hounding me about studying abroad. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go to Rwanda and study genocide. And I thought maybe that would shut people up and be like, no, you really shouldn't do that. And it was a wonderful experience, and I'm so incredibly glad I did it. But it was just kind of one of those weird side paths I went down academically that I absolutely loved. I didn't think I would dislike it by any means, but I am incredibly surprised by how impassioned I am about it. And it really opened my eyes to a area of sociology that I didn't know had existed previously. And sociology is wonderful because it does all the things I had just mentioned I love. It really heavily is influenced by social psychology. Most experiments we have about social behavior are social psychology experiments. Like the Ash line study is one of the ones where it's commonly referred to for groupthink of, if you have a line of 6 people and everybody before the actual participant is in on it, and they say, no, the shorter line is longer, you're going to have that person who isn't in on this study, who is the actual participant, say the same thing as everybody else, even though they can clearly visibly see that it's the incorrect answer. So that's one. And then, there's just so many social psychology experiments that are fascinating that were done in, the 1950s, right after, that were actually heavily influenced by researchers who were affected by the Holocaust. And they had questions regarding what drives people to do this. This is horrible, and I have faith in humanity, but how does this happen? So, Ash is one of them. And there's a couple shock experiments that are no longer considered ethical by any means.
Most of them.
Most of these are not. Most of these would not get reviewed by an IRB and pass anymore.
No.
But, a lot of experiments that were actually influenced by these tragic events of the Holocaust and things like that, social psychology and then sociology use on a regular basis. And then, the historical part of school that I always loved is a huge part of sociology too, or at least the genocide studies aspect of it, because the question you had asked earlier, how did this happen, is often answered, at least in part, by looking at, how Rwanda was colonized and studying the historical aspects of Rwandan culture. And that's a common theme throughout genocide studies, is looking at, well, why do these groups dislike each other? What happened that caused what could have been a small conflict to be mass violence or a genocide? So everything just kind of clicked when I did the study abroad. There was no real intent to go into this. Dr. Brem asked me during the abroad trip, she was like, are you going to go to grad school for sociology? And I directly told her, no, I'm trying to be a clinical psychologist. And she's like, okay, well, if that doesn't work out, sociology would be a really good fit for you, it seems like, because you're really interested in this. And when I didn't get in for clinical psychology to a PhD program, I was like, you know what? I was so much happier when I was studying genocide abroad, or just studying it in general, because it really does combine, all of my passions. So yeah, that's the long story of how we got to where we're at.
Isn't it amazing how moments in our lives that we think are so shitty are actually the ones that we needed the most?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where I got rejected from grad school for the first time, and then COVID hit. So I even had people emailing me back and being like, I'm sorry, like, you didn't get into grad school, but also everyone who did get in is getting deferred a year, or actually we have to cancel the program for this upcoming year, and all sorts of stuff. And even the people who wrote letters of rec for me were like, honestly, you're probably better off not having gotten into a program in, 2020, or in the cohort of 2020, because you're going to have school online, and who knows what that's going to look like. And it's not going to be the same academic experience. So yeah, it's been, I don't know, a weird blessing in disguise. And I definitely needed that step back moment and wait, am I doing what my plan was? And do my plan and what I want to do and what I like doing line up? Because, I am passionate about psychology. Like, I can talk about mental health all day and how incredibly important it is. And I was going into clinical psychology, so I was going to study like anxiety and depression, which is incredibly prevalent. But I don't know if I'm cut out for sitting one-on-one with a client for 8 hours a day and, not seeing a quick turnaround or anything like that. So it's really one of those, it was a good aha moment of like, oh, this isn't like, yeah, I've been working towards this goal since my sophomore year of college, but I think I probably should have reevaluated my goal in my junior year of college. Yeah.
I feel you. I definitely did the exact same thing right at the end of college as well. So my life completely flipped upside down. Something very, very, very similar story. And it's amazing. I just love, though, at least like in your case and my case as well, before we took the next step of education, we luckily figured it out before we went hundreds of thousands of dollars in possibly student loan debt to possibly get a degree that we weren't actually wanting in the first place. So
yeah,
very grateful for that.
Yeah. And there's wonderful new things that came out of my psychology experience. No, I can't talk experience. I had the ability to write a senior thesis, and, it helped me evaluate things like, oh, I do love writing research papers, which is a weird thing to like, but, that is something I enjoy. And so I probably do want to go the academic route with whatever I want to do. But, I don't love the specific research question I have. So maybe that's what needs to be reevaluated. So even if you are on the wrong track, just life advice to people listening, there's little things you can get from what you're doing too. It's not always a complete wash. It's not like I wasted my senior year of college writing a thesis about depression symptoms. There's little things you get out of it too. So,
yeah. Because we even talked about, because I think right now, I'm not working in conservation. I'm working for a real estate startup tech company just because, COVID, and if something similar happened to you, you're working at this super fun little pizza shop right now,
yep.
like in this managerial role, and they love you and you're freaking good at making pizzas. You know what I mean? Like, It's just,
Weird
It
little
is
hidden skill sets.
exactly. It's just got to make the moment now work. Like we're making our bills work, we're paying everything, and but knowing in our mind that this is what we want to pursue. Is like this is what we want to study, um, and everything, and how we want to go down. So take me back to Rwanda. So
Mhm.
a lot of people listening may not even know where this is.
Yeah,
So, so,
very good
so
point.
where exactly is Rwanda? And then I would love for you to tell me more about your experience there and what
Yeah,
it was like traveling there and yeah, what your day to day was like and really paint a picture of what Rwanda is for someone who might not even know that that was a
yeah,
country.
absolutely. So it is a very, very small country. And when I say small, it is frequently the state they use to compare it to is Maryland. So the surface area or square footage of Maryland, but you put what is called the land of 10,000 hills. And I think what they describe as a hill is what I in central Ohio consider a small mountain. Um, these are not tiny hills, but I am from a very flat place. So, um, yeah, it's a very, very hilly country in East Africa. It is surrounded, it's landlocked. So Burundi is right there, Tanzania is right there. It has a lake that is absolutely beautiful called, I'm probably butchering this name and a lot of names that I'm saying throughout this, so I apologize. But Lake Kivu is right there as well. But yeah, landlocked country in East Africa, a lot of hills. You do have a small national rainforest. You also have a small safari area. It's got a little bit of everything that you would, I think, normally think of Africa as. But my experience there, I've never met a more welcoming group of people than the Rwandans. They're just excited to see you. They really love sharing their country with people internationally. Part of that, again, it's my experience. I'm very clearly not from there. We all were very clearly not from there. I think out of the 14 people that we went with, I think 12 of us were really, really pale white. So it's very obvious to them that we're not from there, and they get very excited to, feed people and just share their history with you. Because we were studying genocide, every single person we interviewed and talked to would tell you their version of the national narrative surrounding it before they went into, we might be interviewing somebody about their women's co-op that they were part of for survivors. But instead of just going into the questions like we would in a normal American context, they'll tell you the half-hour long story of the genocide, and then they'll go into, their questions and things like that. So, just incredibly welcoming people. They do have a national narrative surrounding the genocide, and everybody's pretty much on the same page about the timeline and the historical events, and they'll add their personal story into it. But it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been just traveling. And I've been to a lot of national parks and everything, but everywhere you look, there's just beautiful green space. The hills are incredibly annoying to drive through. Not that I was driving, but at least it's a beautiful scenery the entire time you're driving. But yeah, to get to one side of the country, like I said, it's the size of Maryland, but you'd expect, driving straight through Maryland might take 2 hours. We went from Kigali, the capital, to the rainforest, which was basically directly west, and tiny country. I think it took us 6 hours one way to drive. So just, it is dirt roads outside of the capital and, traditional developing country, I would say. But absolutely gorgeous. From a conservation standpoint, they're one of the only areas you can visit lowland gorillas. And a huge part of their GDP as a country is around ecotourism, which I find fascinating. It's not what I want to study, but it's absolutely fascinating because they are receiving and have since the genocide received a lot of international aid pretty much across the board. It's not very I don't want to say partisan, but like they'll get US aid and they get aid from China. They get aid from Russia. It's pretty international that they're getting assistance, but a large portion of their GDP, I think a third, is like ecotourism based. So yeah, that's really exciting from a conservation standpoint because
Absolutely.
they have absolutely made it so that instead of poaching, they can instead turn poachers into tour guides. And that supplies, local restaurants with business. It supplies hotels with business. Their airport is pretty well developed. So, they can staff people there. Taxis, any transportation services, all get business from this. And it's not cheap to do, I will say. I did not do it while I was there. A couple $1,000s, I think, for a day trip or something like that. But absolutely very great for their economy. And it's exciting to see because you have the Congo also borders it. And you can't go see gorillas in the Congo because they are very war torn at the moment. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because that's one of the reasons why I love Rwanda so much is, when they came out of all of this, because from a wildlife standpoint, when it comes to genocide and just mass conflict in general, it's always the wildlife and nature that hurts significantly. I don't want to say the most because that's really demonized, just doesn't,
Yeah.
the atrocity that is genocide and what happens to other lives is just, heartbreaking. But when that happens, then everything suffers, all of the wildlife, because when that happens, there's no stability. So there's no way to get your basic needs of life, just how you had the example of somebody stealing, tiles from another house because they had fled the country. Well, maybe that might have been their only way to get the tiles because everything was just completely non-existent. When a country is war torn like that, then to get basic needs and supplies can be very, very hard. And then when that happens, well, you still need to feed your family. So there is a forest right there. And this is when, the bushmeat trade gets way higher because like you still need money. I still need to find a way to pay for things to support my family. So, the black market increases, bushmeat, poaching, all these really bad things for wildlife happen during times of peak human violence. And then on top of that, then when the more contact you have with wildlife and these animals that should just be left alone, then you have higher cases of zoonotic diseases. And then there could be a plague of some zoonotic disease that goes through a human population because they are closer to this wildlife. So it's this vicious cycle of just pure death in all way, shape, and form. Like the wildlife dies, human dies, culture dies. I mean, so many bad things can happen when these conflicts arise. And that's why it's so incredible for countries like Rwanda when they came back that they had this very strong conservation mindset and they have these plans in place for one of the most endangered and most important animals that we have to save right now. And I mean, it's expensive. Like you said, it is so expensive to go on a gorilla trek in Rwanda because that is how much value they place on their gorillas, which is super, super, super exciting. And I talked about it quite a lot. Me and Arthur did in my episode 6, where we talked about like human habituation versus food conditioning. This is the exact example of correct human habituation. Like there's only certain groups that you can go see, certain gorilla families that you can go see. You can't have like any food with you. It's just simply, you are just along in the forest with them and they do not care that you're there. And they're very highly protected because they bring in a lot of money. I mean, if it costs you US dollars, it costs, I don't know what the current price is right now since I no longer work for my last company, but it was like $1,200, $1,500 or something like that per gorilla trek to do. I mean, that's just one. And then you can spend an hour with them, which from everything I've seen, it's like one of the most amazing wildlife encounters. And I've heard people that are like in the field and they tell me that to this day, like the gorilla trek was the most amazing wildlife encounter they've ever had in their life. So it's worth the money if you have it.
Oh yeah.
But, yeah. So beautiful what Rwanda has done in so many different ways, like how they've come back from this, how they didn't just come back and kill everybody else, and then how they made conservation such a part of their economy moving forward.
Yeah,
Because without it, who knows if the gorillas would even still be here? Honestly,
absolutely. No,
honestly,
it's very, very true. And it is expensive. It was something that they were like, well, are we going to go see gorillas while we're in Rwanda, like on our study abroad? And they're like, well, the price of your study abroad would double.
literally
So
double.
yeah, literally, because it's actually a very affordable study abroad. If anyone, the actual flight to Rwanda is probably about as much as a gorilla trek, in all honesty. So if you're interested in visiting Rwanda, the flights are not that expensive in my personal opinion for expensive flights internationally.
Especially Africa, because Africa can get expensive.
Africa can get really expensive. Your flight will always be a connection to Uganda, pretty much always. But yeah, no, it's not cheap at all, but it is absolutely worth it. And they do a fantastic job from everything I've heard and seen, both being there and then, talking to you. The zoo always praised it when I've had people do it that I know who work there. And they're not just focused on the gorillas. They have a notorious plastic bag ban that is usually, the Achilles heel of all tourists that go there. But, they've had a ban on plastic bags for a long time because they realized how strong or how bad of a pollutant it was. They were finding them in their forests and they just completely said no more. So don't bring your plastic bags to Rwanda. It's really not that hard from personal experience. Just get a cloth tote.
Exactly.
But yeah, they are really very conservation focused as a nation. And, they are actually the fourth of women in political seats and power. They're actually the fourth largest ratio of men to women. They made a big initiative after the genocide as well, actually. I probably should mention this earlier. Where a big push was, okay, we think, and this is actually a false claim, but it had good outcomes, as weird as that sounds. The thought process in the aftermath of the genocide was women are less violent than men. So we can prevent this from happening if we put more women in power. So they made a quota system where I think and I'm not 100% sure on this, I can send you for your show notes as well. I think it's a fourth of all of their congressional seats, and it's not in Congress. It's a little different than our political system, but a fourth of their political representation has to be women. And they've actually exceeded that quota pretty heavily. So I think the only countries that are ahead of them in the ratio of men to women are Scandinavian countries, and then it's Rwanda randomly on that list. And I should say it is a falsehood. We know from a sociological perspective that women are not less inclined to commit violent acts. It's just the type of violent acts they commit are different than that of men. So women might be less inclined to, directly kill somebody, but they are more likely to poison someone or do things that are more indirect causes of death for other individuals. And we saw women commit a lot more property crime, like I mentioned, with the roofing. So no, they weren't actively going and killing their neighbors, but they were, stealing all of their neighbors' property. And that has its consequences as well.
Yes.
But yes, in Rwanda's case, less women committed genocide directly than men. And so that was their thought process kind of boiled down. It was a little bit more nuanced than what I just said. But in short, they were like, oh, women are less violent. Let's put them in power. So it's had really good consequences. They're much more female friendly than a lot of other nations in their region. So, yeah.
So I think that's the perfect segue to this nonprofit.
Yeah.
That's like freaking perfect. You couldn't have set that up better. So tell me all the things. Tell me how you got involved, because I know that in itself is a story. And then the mission, and I mean, yeah, let's just go into it.
Absolutely. So the nonprofit we're talking about is called Miss Able Humera. It is a Rwandan-based nonprofit that focuses on job training and reproductive health education primarily. We are branching out, and it's in the works currently, to expand our programs to a couple more things like community outreach and partnering with local schools. But it's a Rwanda nonprofit that educates women who are disabled on the topics I just mentioned. It's an incredibly important task. The founder, his name is Godelieve, and I'm going to mispronounce her last name, Akagame, I believe. That's probably incorrect. And she is one of the best people I have ever spoken to. She's absolutely wonderful and such a sweet person. She married, I think back in 2018, her current husband, who is a double amputee as a result of violence in the 1994 genocide. And he's a painter, so he, I think, paints using his feet and his mouth, and creates beautiful watercolors if you want to look him up online. But she married him back in 2018, and she received a lot of stigma and stigma from her friends and family, and was kind of ostracized overall from a lot of people she considered like close personal friends, because he was disabled. And in Rwanda, there is, as in a lot of other countries, and a little bit even in the US, I would say, a stigma against people who are disabled as subhuman, for lack of a better phrase. And so, they were like, you're a beautiful woman, like you're fertile, you should go marry somebody who, is able-bodied and can provide for you. And, a lot of more patriarchal thought process, kind of. So in her experience of being ostracized, she obviously went through with the marriage. They have 2 beautiful children currently. But she realized, or her eyes were opened to a form of discrimination that she currently or hadn't previously experienced in Rwanda. And she realized that not only the disabled community was highly ostracized, but specifically women within the disabled community were incredibly ostracized, and they were frequently having to turn to things like sex work in order to provide for themselves. And then because they hadn't received any formal education, because the school system had, ostracized them and failed to educate them, or they hadn't even gone to school, they hadn't learned about reproductive health education, so they didn't know how condoms worked, and they were working in sex work. Or they actually had, in one scenario she's told me about, a woman thought that she couldn't get pregnant when she wasn't bleeding, which is obviously the opposite. So she had a woman, a lot of women are having unwanted pregnancies, who are disabled, and it's exacerbating the situation they're already in of not being able to provide for themselves, because now they have 2 mouths to feed or 3 mouths to feed. And, it's a very vicious cycle of poverty, basically. So she realized this was occurring, and her first step was to start educating disabled women about reproductive health. So her and a couple of volunteers that she found in her community just started going around, and they made some pamphlets, and they started, just educating these women about their bodies, which is something, everyone has the right to have knowledge about, in my opinion. And she's educated, I think it was 16 women thus far on it, and she has a growing team. And COVID has very much put a wrench in this.
In everything.
In everything. Yeah. I think currently, last time we spoke, she had said that hopefully this week, their providences would no longer be under lockdown, because right now they basically can't enter or exit any providence in Rwanda. So they're hoping this week that will open back up. But, COVID has very much thrown a wrench in things, because they're a very communal nation, and they haven't been able to, meet with anybody. And, their internet connection isn't like in the US where you can just hop on a Zoom meeting. It's questionable when people are living in poverty there if they have internet access. So that's kind of halted everything. But she basically was amping up before COVID to really expand that reproductive health education program. And she's been doing things like, we're trying to write grants right now. We're starting a jobs training program, which she's got, I think, 4 or 5 different disabled individuals learning how to crochet and sew and use tailor things, so that she can have them make traditional African handcrafts, that we can then sell at their local markets and online on our website. And then I'm working on getting connections in the US that'll sell them in physical retail locations as well. And the idea of the jobs program is that, okay, now they've been educated on reproductive health, so they understand, how not to exacerbate their issue of, having multiple mouths to feed, and they can have safe sex. And, we were also educating them on things like what consent is and what their legal rights surrounding it are, because you have a lot of incidences of sexual assault in these scenarios, just in general, globally. But specifically, if people don't even understand that concept or that boundary. But now that we've educated them on this, let's work on the next step, which is getting them out of poverty and, teaching them how to do, traditional African handcrafts. Our next stage of the program has a recycling program built into it. So they're hoping that we can train people to pick up recycling or like plastic products that are wasted and recycle them and turn them into, home items like combs and outlet covers and things like that we can sell as well for a profit. And then it becomes a self-sustaining program, hopefully, in which, some of the proceeds go to buying more cloth and upkeep of the sewing machines and new training costs. And the other portion of the proceeds go directly to the people who are creating the products. So right now we've raised $1,140, which have already been sent over to her. And she's in the process of actively researching what products to make and training individuals and renting sewing machines and all of that. So that's wonderful. So that's in short where they're at. And we're also partnering with the University of Dayton at the moment, which is a new development since I last spoke to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember that.
Yeah, so we're going places.
Nice.
So yeah, we're partnering with the University of Dayton. It's in its very early stages, but a student group there for their human rights major is working with us to start community school programs, basically in an American context is an after-school program where kids can learn things like ASL or Braille, so that basically their future leaders have some understanding of, what the disabled community goes through. We're removing the stigma at an early age. So hopefully legislation down the road in 10, 15 years will be more positive towards the disabled community. It's a really great idea. It's in its very early stages currently. But we're working with them, and, they're also helping us boost our social media presence and with grant writing, because right now that's just me and I don't know what I'm doing fully. But yeah, so it's a wonderful organization. Let me take a sip of wine. I'll get into how I got involved.
Girl, you take all the sips of wine. That's what we're about. Happy hour chats. These are fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got involved kind of back to the zoo. A family friend who also worked there knew that I did the study abroad in Rwanda. And she is also a friend of the founder, Godelieve. Godelieve's husband, whose name is Frederick, is a speaker frequently at a annual fundraiser for the Rwandan gorillas at the Columbus Zoo Aquarium called the Rwandan Fete. So, in non-COVID years, he frequently flies in and gives a keynote speech about, his community, and the Columbus Zoo has helped him personally in starting a community center that he runs that helps get kids off the street and, provides them with a safe place after school. Something very traditional in our head, but that was really important for them as a community. The Rwandan Fete at the Columbus Zoo's main focus is kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier with conservation of you have to help the people so that they help the wildlife. You can't just directly go in and help wildlife because you do still, if you don't provide the local community with a job or train them on how to do a job, you can go in and dump thousands of dollars into gorilla conservation. But the moment you leave, they go back to poaching because that's the most equitable thing for them to do. But if you go in and you spend even a smaller amount of money just training them and showing them how to make money off of ecotourism, they will turn around when you leave and they'll execute that. And it becomes a holistically profitable experience, and you're saving wildlife simultaneously. So it's, saving wildlife by helping people. So he was heavily involved in that organization, and a family friend knew him and his wife, Godelieve, from working on that event. Godelieve had reached out to the family friend and asked, hey, I need basically not a co-founder, but someone, a US connection, or just someone to help me with the stuff I don't understand from a more human rights perspective and less of like a nonprofit running perspective. And kind of out of left field, the family friend was like, oh, like I know somebody who studied abroad in Rwanda who wants to do research there, who might be a good fit. I don't know. And so she reached out to me and I connected with Godelieve, and it's been, I think, almost 4 months now that I've been working voluntarily for Disable Humera. So, you know, she and I connected. She's absolutely, like I said, wonderful. I've already mentioned her story, but she's one of the most caring people I ever spoken to, and just really wants to help others as much as possible. She really, really feels compelled by these women's stories. And it's not just women, I should say. It is called Misable, but, you know, they don't exclude anyone from the disabled community. So there are men that are working on our jobs training program, and it is a wide variety of disabilities. Yes, my research in the future is probably more interested in people who became disabled due to events like mass violence and genocide, but the organization as a whole does focus on individuals with Down syndrome and cerebral palsy, and who are blind and deaf, and, you know, and then also amputees. But it's a very all-encompassing organization, and they have so many wonderful ideas. It's just, they're at the point where they're like, okay, we do have financial boundaries as to what we were able to execute at the moment. But yeah, absolutely wonderful organization. So
That's great. And for those handicrafts, so is that something that is being worked upon now, or is there anywhere that anyone could go online and buy those already, or is that in the works?
it's currently in the works. So we are hoping sometime this year. It's really kind of up in the air because we are still waiting on, like I said, we've raised $1,100 or so that have been sent to her. And that's enough to get, you know, I think our goal is 200 handbags is the main craft they're working on in the next couple months. But we do have to, you know, continue to get funds to purchase the cloth, to purchase the sewing machines, that kind of stuff. So I think our goal was 11,000 and some change, 11,000 and some change, if I'm not wrong. So we're a little under a tenth of our goal. So,
if anybody listening, like they have some, I mean, it's tax season right now, so people are probably gonna get some refunds. They might have like some extra money just to help throw out in the world to help reach this $11,000 goal. Where can anybody go just to help get there?
Yeah. So it's on our website. There's a donations tab. It's a GoFundMe page. But it's just Misable, MISSABLE, and then Humera, no dash or anything, HUMURA.com. And like one of the first things that you'll see when you log onto the page is a donate button. So yeah.
That's perfect. Yes.
Yeah. And anything is appreciated, any small amount. We've had a couple of very large donations, which is mostly how we've gotten to the 1,100. But any dollar amount is very welcomed. So
yeah. No, yeah. Especially when, I mean, collectively, if we all could just give a little bit, like, that could be reached pretty quickly, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Yeah. No, I'll make sure that that's blasted everywhere. So it's like, hey, if you have $5 or $500 that is just laying around, then this would be a really good place to put it. Awesome. No, that's great. Her story is just so inspiring, and to see a need, I mean, something that she was personally dealing with, and to turn it into something that beautiful. She would have every right to feel the exact opposite, you know, and to be like, okay, this is a need. I love my husband tremendously. Obviously there's more people that are experiencing what he's experiencing. So, and the fact that you're on it too is like super cool. Like, super cool. Like, that's just such a cool life experience. That's awesome. Yeah, because you just like recently started the Instagram and stuff, right? And you're
it's got like 12 posts. It's ridiculous. I'm a very weird 23-year-old. I did not have Facebook and I did not have Instagram prior to January of this year. I'm pretty sure is like the date or the timeline for that. Yeah, because I don't know. major in psychology and you learn how horrible social media is for you. And I grew up, it was a very strict Catholic household. So like my parents were very against it. And then I just went into college, and then my major basically told me that it's horrible for your mental health. And I was like, okay, we'll stay off of social media. And then I started a nonprofit. She's like, can you get our social media up and running? And I was like, I can try. I don't know what I'm doing. I know looking at me, you would be like, yeah, she knows exactly how Facebook works or how Instagram works. And I'm like, I'm not entirely sure. So we're trying our best to get a social media presence. It's not the strongest at the moment. But we're getting there. We've got some followers. So.
I know I'm one of them.
Yeah. But yeah, we're getting there. We're chugging along. But yeah, it's really just it's a wonderful learning experience. And it's another weird connection because I worked in high school. Again, I was in Catholic school from kindergarten, I think it was pre-K even, like preschool through my senior year of high school. And so part of the high school graduation requirement was, I think, like some small number of volunteer hours, like 24 or something like that. And so we had to do like a sophomore service project. And I worked with the Special Olympics locally. And I actually ended up staying on there for 3 years, except like I think I was only required to do like 1 season of student coaching, and I think I did like 5 or something like that for different sports. So it's another weird thing where I'm like, I'd love to work with, disabled individuals or help the disabled community in some way, and I could never find a connection point. And then this popped
up. It materialized.
Yeah, exactly.
It manifested.
Like, similar to how I was like, I don't know what I want to study or do for a career, but and then everything just kind of combined. So it's another weird little coincidence in that regard. And, I'm learning things that I would never learn otherwise that are wonderful to know in academia, like how to write a grant.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm getting practice at it before I go into grad school and need money for it personally. So yeah.
No, that's great.
It's a wonderful experience.
That's great. So there's something that I love to ask, and just because it's just very interesting to hear everybody's life stories. What do you think in your story so far has been one of your biggest struggles that you've had to overcome?
I would say overall, personally, I know I have struggled with mental health for a long time. It's one of those things where I had a lot of personal stuff come up, like my junior and senior year of high school. And it's why I got into psychology, actually. A lot of it is not just wanting to be a lawyer, but personal journey through depression, not understanding what it was or why I was feeling that way. And then anxiety is usually coupled with depression. And in my case, was no different. And learning how to kind of work through it. And a lot of that came from studying it in college, in all honesty. I recommend therapy if you're feeling down. It never hurts to talk to somebody. There is nothing wrong with admitting that, you're not feeling 100% mentally. So if anyone out there is struggling, there's hundreds of, counselors available. There's also wonderful online Zoom available, therapists and things like that, with everything that's going on. But definitely my mental health has been probably the biggest thing I've worked through over the last 6 or 7 years, probably. And, it's, there's silver linings to everything. Yeah, I had really a bad time with it for 2 or 3 years, senior year through maybe my sophomore year of college. But now when I'm faced with something that's, I study genocide, or I want to study genocide, something that, would make people upset or, triggers me, for lack of a better phrase again, I know to take a step back and to change my perspective. Like cognitive behavioral therapy is something that I studied really heavily when I was going into psychology. And the core tenets of it are that we need to change how we look at events instead of and our behaviors surrounding those events instead of actually changing, the actual event. So learning how to look at things in a different light and take for, in one way or another, a positive spin on it has been something that I've learned through this process that I wouldn't take back for the world, in all honesty. So, it really helps me on a day-to-day basis, even of like, oh, I'm really angry about X. Well, there's a positive way to look at that too of, well, now you can go do Y and Z or something like that. Like, you didn't get into grad school. Well, now you have money to go buy a house or something like that. So yeah, definitely. I think that would probably be my biggest struggle personally, at least.
Was there a trigger or anything that at that time?
I was going through a lot of stuff at home, more or less. So I've always been in conflict with my parents to some extent. I'm a very boisterous person. And we've worked through all of it since then. But basically, I think a lot of stress of, having to figure out what I wanted to do in college, going to college, being excited for that independence, but just all the change combined into one. And yeah, just having just general home conflicts that I don't think are that uncommon, in all honesty, for most teenagers to have. And again, Catholic, like very Roman Catholic conservative household, and I am bi and very liberal. So, politically, we didn't always get along. Religiously, we did not get along a lot of the time.
At all, right?
Yeah, I'm
from our conversation.
From everything I can say, yeah, I'm atheist, sometimes agnostic, but probably atheist. So, I think religion and politics and all of that stuff and then just being an angry teenager.
Yeah, that doesn't help at all.
Yeah, exactly. Being a very angry and very independent teenager did not help. So yeah, I think just a lot of things people can relate to of being, 17, 18 and angry. And, we've worked through it, like I said, and it came out better. I have a much healthier relationship with both my parents because of it. So again, there is a silver lining, and, now there's boundaries and it's healthy. So yeah.
Boundaries are good. Boundaries are good. Well, boundaries are always safe, even in relationships, parents, everything. But no, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing that. Because I just really love to ask this question because I don't think it's talked about enough. And what I'm starting to find, the more of these interviews I have of how many times mental health is brought up. And it just goes to show, and just how many of us experience these type of things and how we always feel so alone as we're going through it. And it's just not talked about enough. I mean, I know in my field, it's not talked about, like our conservation field. Well, I mean, you're in sociology, psychology. I'm sure it's talked about a freaking shit ton, but
yeah, a decent amount. You'd be surprised, but
oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean,
so more of like from like a study sense, not necessarily like a personal sense.
Yeah, everyone's educated about it. And there's definitely a movement within the field. Within social science specifically, I would say there's definitely a field. And I'm personally not in the academic portion of it right now. And there was definitely a push a year or two ago when I was, in classes and things like that to be like, hey, like your mental health matters. But I've seen that, I think socially in general in the last couple of years, just be a big push because everybody does feel that way. Like it's a very isolating feeling. And it's incredibly important to know, like, no, like 30% of the population experiences depression at any given point in their life. Often more than once. Yeah. But and that's one of the reasons I wanted to go into it. I'm like, there's a lot of people that need counseling who can't achieve it because we don't have enough counselors. So, it's a big need socially and societally. So, people do need to know, like, they're not alone. And yes, every person's experience with it is going to be a little different. But, there is a very good chance that the person across from you in a room also is going through depression or anxiety, or, there's lots of other mental health issues, but those tend to be some of the big ones that a lot of people experience on a pretty regular basis. So, yeah. I appreciate you asking. Like, I try to be really open about it. I will tell most people, like, yeah, no, I have, depression. Like, it's something that I struggle with on a fairly regular basis, but, it gets easier, and there's some days that are worse than others. But yeah, no, it's definitely something you can work through. And I think that's important to understand. It might feel like you can't work through it, but take it a day at a time and you'll get there. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
I mean, I had no idea what you were going to say. So no, that was good. That was good. Like I said, it's to the point where it's becoming a trend. Like when I asked that question completely unprompted, like what has been your biggest struggle? And like I said, on more than one occasion, the answer has been mental health in some point in their life or currently battling. Like Haley, she was on my show, and she, was very open about talking about this. She even has like medication that she's taking currently for it. And she has this very vibrant, bubbly personality. And it just proves that it just, you can't judge people because you don't know what they're going through inside. Like you don't know. We all have our own personal struggles in some way, shape, or form. And what someone is presenting on the outside might not necessarily be what's going on the inside. So just love everybody and have empathy for everybody, because you just never know what they're currently experiencing at that time and how well they're hiding it or how well they're not hiding it.
It's very, very true. And it's funny because like you think the girl that studies genocide is like probably struggles with some depression or something, but it's not related to that even remotely, weirdly enough too. So like you never know what is going on with someone in their personal life. And it can be a professional issue too. Like there's plenty of people who go into this and they're like, no, it is, like I think that's probably what one of my mentors gets asked most often is like, how do you deal with, talking about genocide on a regular basis? And she's like, well, I exercise on a regular basis. I eat healthy. And some days there's bad days. Like, there is like, sometimes it's really hard. But yeah, one day at a time is all I can really reiterate.
Absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this that are in the conservation field feel the same way. It's like, it feels like an uphill battle every single day, all day long. Cause I mean, the topic itself is depressing. You're like, okay, so this wildlife that I've dedicated my entire life to, the most recent headline came out that their numbers are dwindling. Their poaching has increased. It's always negative. It's always something really bad. And unfortunately, I happen to love big cats as my thing. And okay, talk about one heck of a group to love, because everywhere they're in trouble pretty much. In general, big cats are in trouble everywhere. So just like that personal struggle of everything is always negative, everything is always bad, and then just finding a way to cope with it and persevering every single day. And being the scientist side, like even though the topic of genocide is quite horrific, like I can see how it would be super fascinating from like a human psychology standpoint. I mean, I love history, like hardcore history. The podcast is like one of my favorite of all freaking time. Dan Carlin and like the details that he goes into of what has the insane things that have happened in the past are, I mean, we are a tame species in comparison to our ancestors. So even though, yes, genocide nowadays is bad, listen to Dan Carlin and some of the shit that we've done to each other in the past. It is freaking insane. But very interesting. But super interesting. And I don't know why it's entertaining, but it's really entertaining. No, that's great. No, that's great. That's so good. So I guess what's a high point? So what would you say has been like in all of your studies or your journey or the nonprofit, or what do you think has been like some of your highest points or what you're most proud of?
Yeah. So actually it kind of ties into my last answer or a little bit to what we were just talking about. For every sad number you hear or, depressing thing you read, there's a person who survived, who has a story that they want to tell, and they'll tell you, and there's a personal connection to be made. So, I would have never, without studying genocide, been connected with Godelieve and known that, she was doing these wonderful things in Rwanda to help the disabled community. When I was in Rwanda, a big part of our study abroad was interviewing one or two people at a time as a big group and asking them questions. And it was everything from people who were genocide perpetrators. So they committed genocide and they had gotten out of jail, and women's groups for survivors and individuals who saved people during genocide. Because, it wasn't everyone killing. A lot of people killed, but not everyone. There were people who, were going in and hiding people in their fields and, under banana leaves and things like that. Or like in the case of the Holocaust, you hear about people who were hiding individuals in their attic and beneath floorboards and things like that. So for every horrible thing you read, it's nice to know that humanity does go both ways. Yes, some people might choose to commit genocide, but yes, other people also choose to save and to help and to prevent it. And along those lines, a big reason I was drawn to criminology and like when I did want to be a lawyer, I was drawn to how people can change. And that's another reason why I love psychology. I think the human mind is so malleable. And, you see it with people being able to do horrible things, but you also see it with, I don't think because you commit a crime that you are this irredeemable person and that you should have a life sentence in prison or anything like that. You are able to change. Just because you did one bad action doesn't mean that you are a bad person. I don't honestly believe in the concept of good versus evil or good and bad, which is another reason I don't fit into Christianity very well. But I was really drawn to just how people can change and the extremes that you can see in one life. So that is what kind of I absolutely love about what I want to study later on in life, or when I hopefully get into grad school, is just, meeting people who realize they messed up and they want to change. Because honestly, as nice as it was, and as weird as it sounds, as nice as it was to talk to people who saved individuals during genocide, it was more inspiring to talk to people who committed genocide and went to prison and served their sentence and were now actively trying to better their communities that they were living in, and who had gained forgiveness from the families whose brother, sister, mother they had killed. And seeing how far they have come is absolutely incredible and really inspiring, as weird as that sounds. Like, yeah.
Oh, I can totally see that. I can totally see that.
So
That's, just like you said, not necessarily like the good versus evil thing, but to see how somebody can change so dramatically. And also just the fact that someone can forgive someone who did that. Because, who knows what mental state or, groupthink that person was under at the time. It's almost like a magic spell. That can convince people to do such atrocious acts, which they would never do otherwise, but just how heavily they're influenced. And, oh man, I've never been put in this situation, and hope and pray to God I don't, but like if someone killed one of my family members, like would I be noble enough to forgive? That's a deep question. And so to hear that, and I'm sure that those people were insanely grateful to be welcomed back into their community, because their community would have every reason not to, but just to welcome them back in is, wow, that's so inspiring. Like, us humans might be freaking crazy, but there's some good parts of it.
Yeah. No. So I think, yeah, to answer your question in short, seeing all aspects of humanity is why I love what I do. Because it is incredible. And it's the same thing with the Miss Abel Humira is, she was ostracized, and I'm sure she's reconnected with people who have ostracized her. And she's also made new connections with people she wouldn't have met otherwise. And, she's seen both sides of people, the good and the bad. And, you just do what you can to stay on the good side.
Great. This has been awesome. Is there any last minute, last parting thoughts that you would like to throw out there or anything?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful to chat with you as always.
Yeah. Yeah. And if anybody wants to follow Miss Abel Humira, what are the best ways to? I know you mentioned the website, but just one more time, just a quick rundown of what all you're on.
Yeah, we're on Instagram and Facebook. That may be expanding with our partnership with the University of Dayton. Not 100% sure. We might have a Twitter soon. We'll see. It's just missabel.humira on Instagram. And then on Facebook, it's missabelhumira.nonprofit. Because somehow there was already a Miss Abel Humira on Facebook. Those are our handles. And you can also find links on the website for both of those. And if we expand to other platforms, those will also be on the website. So yeah.
Perfect. And if anybody reaches out and wants to connect, I'll make sure they get to you and where they need to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna.